Unit 3,
We're
here we go.
Getting down to the end here.
How are we already here?
I don't know. Amy.
Part of me feels like we started yesterday. The other part of me feels like we've been doing this forever.
That's right. So exam 2 is in the books.
Exam 2 is in the books.
All right.
Yeah, way to go, people.
Any thoughts on the second exam as we move into the third unit?
Well, that would have to have included me coming to this to this webisode having graded my second exam. So I'm not there yet.
Full disclosure, when we're recording this, most of you haven't quite taken it yet. We're recording this on exam day. So,
yes. Yeah, I don't have any.
Yeah.
Do you have any predictions on how it went?
Okay, I'm gonna say some hopes. I hope what we saw on the exam was that you gave yourself more time for the essays. I hope that you read the questions thoroughly. I hope that you gave examples. That's the big thing. Even as I'm grading.
Yeah. Specific examples.
Yeah, and the difference between significance and kind of what something is or who something is. So I know as I've been grading, all apologies to my students. I ding you for that every time because it's like that's the big thing. That's the big move.
Yeah.
And that's most of the writing you do on the exam is that. So I'm hoping that you responded to that really well. We'll see as we actually look at those exams. Not much we can say about exam 2 right now, but Amy, Unit 3, what advice do you have for Unit 3? It's a little bit more, it's actually a lot more compressed than Unit 1 or 2.
Just hang in there. I mean, this is like the strong push to the finish. It's sort of, it's just sort of going to be go, go, go. When I compare it to the regular semester, Unit 3, I think one of the challenges with Unit 3 is that it's compressed, and yet at the same time, we're actually covering a lot of history. It's like we are trucking along, and we've got, scientific revolution makes its way into the Enlightenment, and there's also overlap in there, meaning that we have certain figures, philosophers that are they're philosophers, but they're like political philosophers, or that's a hard thing to say. Political philosophers and theorists, and then we've got like people. So I guess my point is that it doesn't. When you're thinking about it, we are actually kind of needing to do some thematic overlap as opposed to sort of like really sort of thinking about people just on a historical timeline. And I find that can be a little bit tricky for students. So,
and I would say the other thing with this unit, we talked early on about how, especially in the museums, there is sort of this choose your own adventure, follow the things you're really interested in. These last 2 museums really are built around that.
Yes.
So,
for sure. We are going to, as we dig deeper here into the scientific revolution, I know that you and I both, in the last webisode, commented on how much we enjoy the scientific revolution. If you had to pick just one reading from the scientific revolution that you would want students to master, what do you think that
there's so many that I like. I'm going to have you go first because there's so many that I like that I'll let you
go. I had my initial instinct was to say the Galileo reading. However, I talked about that in the webisode and why I liked it. And so I thought I'm going to go with the Blaise Pascal reading. I think Pascal just, again, readings don't have to sound contemporary for them to have meaning. That's like not my point. However, I always think it's amazing when you read something that is hundreds of years old and you think, wow, this person has so thoughtfully articulated something that I think, or something that I think that I believe, or both, right? And they have done it in a way that just makes sense, and it's just so inspiring. And so the Pascal reading, as he talks about the idea that we like, how do we hold these things in tension? That which is observable, that which can be proven true to be true, with that which we really can't explain, and how if we get rid of the things that we can't explain, if we get rid of what we call the miraculous, then what really is there to faith? Like, sort of what is the point then? Why do we need it? And what language do we have? What do we do with what we all know are the sort of out-of-body, otherworldly, unprovable experiences that we have that, they aren't just at an emotional level. They can literally be an experience where it's sort of like this was at an emotional, physical, intellectual, spiritual moment. And often those moments that we don't predict, those happen. They're real. So what do we do with those if we say, that we, that there's no room for faith, or there's no room for the miraculous. So I think that's the one I probably
instead of picking somebody different, I wanted to talk a little bit more about Pascal.
Please do.
It's probably one of my favorites. I love the fact whenever we have somebody who's really living in the tension between
exactly.
worlds.
Yeah.
So Pascal is a scientist and mathematician, but and I will say, Galileo is a person of faith, and he talks about faith. But for him, it's kind of it's almost neat the way that it's neat and orderly the way he thinks about faith and science. Where Pascal's a little messier in terms of how we think about that. One of my favorite lines from Pascal, and it's not in the reading we have, but it's a quote that's attributed to him. And this shows to me that Pascal understands the scientific revolution and what's happening, especially in astronomy. But he has this line where he says the silence of these infinite spaces terrify me. Right, so he's aware of how our perception of the world is changing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, so take that, the person who said that, but then think about that is the same person who did this reading. And the thing I love about it is he is saying, yes, there is real knowledge in science, but that's not the only kind of knowledge. That when he talks about the heart, it's not just about there's feelings too, but he's saying that's knowledge. That's just a different kind of knowing. Faith is a different kind of knowing. And I think that's a really, really powerful, powerful thing. So Amy, we're going to play Make the Case in a little bit here,
which we love.
But just to sort of preview that, let's try to make the case that the Enlightenment is the most important time period we cover in this course. What would be what would be the case you would make to say that?
I guess I would say in a way, and it's not like this is something that people were quote saying at the time. However, as we study it and reflect on it, I feel like the Enlightenment is sort of where all these ideas collide, where they all come together, and where we look to the first unit, and we haven't even, for half of that unit, we haven't even gotten to Christianity yet, right? So we're studying a time period where Christianity isn't a dominant influence, it doesn't exist, and then it does, and then we see what happens as that becomes something that was sort of on the fringes to then mainstream in the culture. We move into the second unit, where really what is sort of dominating is the role of the church, and that influences everything, and it influences people's thought on everything, and that there was this common, not necessarily an agreed upon, but this common idea that God exists. Whether you're paying attention to him or not, he exists. And then we get into the Enlightenment, and we see all of these tensions of what it means to live in the world but yet not be of the world really come into again, collision with each other. And what you just sort of said about Blaise Pascal, what I hope students see in John Wesley, is people saying, what does this tension really mean? And creating models for how to do it, working out models for how to do it. And what I hope students find in Unit 3 is just the nuance of that, the fact that living in the world and not of the world doesn't mean something we only eat at Chick-fil-A and we only shop at Hobby Lobby. That it's not, or we completely withdraw and we have nothing to do with, that's not what living in the world but not of the world means. I think that what we see in Pascal is one way of thinking about it as it relates to science. When we look at Wesley, it's one way of looking at it as it relates to how do we live out a gospel in a way that is inclusive and in a way that is actually going to make a difference with the very real problems in the world, especially as the world is starting to become increasingly connected. This is obviously long before the age of the internet. However, even just travel by sea, our story moves from Europe into the Americas. For good and bad, it's a problematic history. And so what we see is that your ideas and your way of living have to have meaning beyond the little culture that you came from.
Yeah, I would say here's the quick version of how I would make the case for it. If we're going to paint the history we study with the broadest possible Martin Buber brush, right? Homelessness and habitation.
Available only at Home Depots.
That's right. Right. So a very broad brush. We could say in unit 1, the habitation was the empire, right? That was the organizing principle. The fall of the empire is the crumbling of that habitation. That's homelessness. Unit 2, very broad brush. The church is the habitation. The end of Unit 2, we get into Unit 3, we start to see the crumbling of that. Unit 3, we see the habitation of the Enlightenment. Now, why is that one particularly important? Because we asked you, are we living in an epoch of habitation or homelessness? Right? If the new habitation is reason coming out of the scientific revolution Enlightenment, if we're living in a world of habitation, it's still probably connected to that habitation. If we're living in a world of homelessness, it's wrestling with the crumbling of that. Right, so that's why that's so important.
Where has it failed?
Right,
where has it failed? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Amy, discussion post. It's not a make the case this time, but we want you to reflect on your own experiences in science classes.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about faith and science. We read Pascal.
Right.
We read Galileo. How do you think about those things? How do you draw some of those ideas into science classes? What are your experiences? I know from reading what you all write, some of you, obviously if you're at Bethel right now, you're at a religious-based school. But your high school, some of you went to secular high schools, some of you went to private Christian high schools. So you maybe have different experiences with thinking about how you wrestle with faith and science. So we want to hear you talk about that. And just like you did on the last discussion post, listen to each other, respond to each other. That's going to make this great.
Yes, no. So keep, and again, don't just keep it simple. Don't just say like, I liked science or I didn't like science. What kind of questions does it raise? Don't be like me where I would probably say, well, when my kids ask me what happens when they turn on the light switch and the lights go on, I tell them it's a miracle. So,
A good medieval person.
A good medieval person.
All right, we'll be right back with Make the Case.
All right, well, welcome back to our second segment. We are going to be playing a rigorous round of Make the Case. Intense,
very contentious,
highly competitive. We have both of our legal representations here fact-checking everything that the other person says. So we are going to start with the question, true or false, Isaac Newton is the single most important person that we talk about in this course. Do you have like a...
I don't even know which one I want
here?
on this.
I know. I don't even... I mean, I kind of...
True's going to go first. Whoever gets true goes first.
Okay. Yeah. Ugh, this is probably... Yeah, this is a challenge for me, this one.
I feel like I can do it either way. I don't even know what I want. What'd you get?
True.
False.
Okay. So... Clearly this is true because guess what? Even if I unlatch the seatbelt that I wear when we're sitting here in the studio, I am not floating away. So Isaac Newton is what helped me understand why that is not happening, because Isaac Newton's central understanding of gravity and how then later on Einstein is going to build on the work of Isaac Newton. This is obviously, I think there's no doubt, there's no arguing that it's one of the most revolutionary scientific discoveries of our time. It impacts all of us. It transcends culture and time. Gravity wasn't just invented in the scientific revolution. When we look back through history, we see that gravity has always existed. And again, it has only been explored to be understood at a greater level as opposed to being disproven. So without gravity, we would not have the advent of flight, which means we would not have space exploration, which means that you and I would not be able to travel this great globe as we do. I feel like that's what I got.
That's right. These are the facts and they are indisputable.
These are the facts. They are indisputable. And before you start, because I think I might know what you're going to say, I just want to lay it out there as a final pull. Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, why was he standing securely on the mount? Gravity.
Because he made gravity, though. Okay, so I have false. And actually, I think this is a really interesting question. And I think the tack I want to take on this can pull apart any question where we think about who's the most important.
Right. Pull it apart, but then bring it all back.
Right, because of gravity.
Because of gravity.
It's interesting when I think about what Newton did. Now, Newton is undoubtedly a person of exceptional genius. But one of the things you said that's interesting is you're like, gravity doesn't start when Newton talked about it, that it was always there. So he's alive with a unique genius and at a unique moment in time where, he even talks about standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before him, right? So if it wouldn't have been Newton, would it have been somebody? Were we headed this direction anyhow? And he happened to be the person standing on the right set of shoulders. So I wonder about, and I'm not even going to make the Jesus case because that's unfair. So I'm not. And I don't know that I have to make the case that somebody else is more important. I just don't know that. It's hard with science because science does feel linear. So it feels like, well, if Newton didn't exist, does that mean we'd be sitting here and none of us would have thought about gravity? It's like, no, somebody would have. It's just the way the story played out, he was the one. Now, the problem with that argument is that tears apart just about anything you're going to make. So then if I have to say, well, who is who might be more important, more influential? I think that's really, really tough because I don't know. I kind of want to, and this is, sorry, Dr. Gertz, I kind of want to attack the question more than I want to attack your answer to it.
I'm okay with that approach.
Right. I mean, I'm trying to think of is there? I mean, in truth, what I would want to look to is somebody. And every example I think of isn't powerful enough because I'm taking Jesus off. I mean, maybe I'd say Paul, right? To say like who has a bigger impact on Christianity and on spreading the gospel of Christ. You know, if not for Paul, does that fail up? I mean, and what makes Paul unique? Well, God talked to Paul. God didn't talk to him. I mean, so that's an argument I could make. I don't know how I feel about making that argument.
Just didn't tell you that God talked to him.
That could be. So I think it raises an issue. I mean, I actually would be curious to know what you think about this. When you think about Newton, is if you, in fact, let's even change this. If you vote for Amy, it's because we needed it to be Newton. I mean, that's how I would think about it. If you didn't think, well, it would have been somebody else, then I would say vote for me. Because then that means Newton isn't all that special. Right. He is a person of monumental genius. He's special. He is special.
Yeah, and I think that then raises the question of, then we could dismiss the importance of anybody, saying
that's the problem with my argument.
We didn't need Martin Luther King Jr. It could have been somebody else.
So that's why I'll throw Paul out there because
I am going to argue we did not need Kim Kardashian. There would have been another.
I am going to fight you on that, but that's going to be off
camera. But that's not this argument.
All right, number 2. More interesting century, the 17th century or the 18th century?
Look at my face already just gave away, who's got a dog in this fight? So, but that, you know what? We're professionals.
That's right.
Doesn't matter what we think personally. Although I'm happy with my...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You get to go first because you're chronological.
So, I mean, essentially, I'm going to make the argument here that 17th century is more important because of the scientific revolution. And even though the scientific revolution is not just confined, that's what makes this unit difficult, is we kind of can't, I mean, when we're talking about the high Middle Ages, we kind of can put some nice dates around it to keep it kind of clean, and we can't do that same thing with the scientific revolution. However, what I think is so significant about the 1600s, the 17th century is 1600s, is that we have these all of this scientific inquiry, the pushback against common notions of truth. Also, we see the difficulty of trying to create new methods and new models for finding truth that will still honor the sort of religious foundations of what's important in Europe, and that becomes this real tension. And so what I think is significant, not just obviously about the scientific discoveries, but is the fact that we also can look to this as a time for reflection for us on when the church did get things wrong, and how the church needed to adapt, and how the church needed to wrestle with new ways of interpreting Scripture and understanding, well, how do we think about Scripture, and what does it mean when we say sola scriptura, that Scripture is our highest authority? Do we need to have a more thoughtful understanding of what we mean when we actually say that? We also see the aftermath. We're still kind of living with the aftermath of wars of religion. And so we see the impact of disagreements over theology leading to horrific consequences. And so I think that so if I had to sum it up, it would be scientific revolution, everything that comes along with that. Also sort of what has happened in the wake of the Protestant Reformation in terms of religious persecution and religion versus religion violence. And well, I shouldn't even say same religion. So I shouldn't say religion versus religion, but we talk about divisions within Christianity fighting each other. This also becomes the era of exploration. So we also are, even though exploration starts as early as the 15th century, this is sort of when it's at its height. So as we start to see the bringing of, and again, totally complicated history, but we start to see and this is a very Eurocentric term, but the age of discovery, as we start to see these power players from Europe using their new technological advances to be able to bring not only their systems of government, but their desire for resources, as well as bring the church, again, complicated history, into what they would have called new parts of the world. The people that were there knew they were there.
So I have the 18th century, so the 1700s, and part of this is you haven't even encountered all that we're going to talk about with the 18th century. And I like everything you say, and actually I feel like my argument rests on your argument. That if this new scientific worldview really is as important as it is, that's actually why the 18th century is more important than you think it is, because that's when that scientific worldview goes mainstream.
Gets applied.
Right.
Yeah,
So what we're going to see throughout the Enlightenment, and we're going to continue to see, is we're going to see people say, well, if we think with sort of that natural laws of nature mindset, if we think about that in the sciences, why don't we think about that in politics, in economics, in art, in religion, in music, in all aspects of life? And I think that's what really ends up shaping our world. If it was just relegated to the sciences, we could say things like, well, most of us it might not even impact our worldview in the same way. The fact of the matter is Newton gets to the rest of us, the non-scientists, through the Enlightenment, and that really is the 18th century. So I think when we talk about people, and I realize there's some crossover here because John Locke writes in 1688, so technically you're going to get John Locke.
Yep. When they were born, then what they did.
Right. Well, no, he writes in it in 1688. No, I
know. I'm saying for others.
Yes. Political revolutions, though, we're going to see those in the 18th century. So the American Revolution, the American Constitution, the French Revolution, like really overturning of old orders. In the same way we saw that in the sciences, we're going to see that in really, really powerful ways. So I think because what you said is so important and so true, that's actually why the 18th century, I think, if we think deep enough about it, maybe is more significant. All right, number 3.
That was very tricky.
If you were to show Ben Franklin's list of his 5 essential religious beliefs to Christians we've encountered in this course, which would they see as the most glaring omission from the list? So we each get to pick a belief. So these just say first or second. Who goes first or second?
Okay.
So
I was like, all right.
I have assigned you a belief.
You what? Yes. Whether you believe it or not. I go second.
All right, I go first. The easiest one to say, and I'm not going to say it, so if you want, you can talk about this. I think notions of grace, right? There's no notion of grace in there, but I'm actually going to peel back.
That's interesting because that was not what I was going to say.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm not going to say grace anyhow because I think there's something else that if Franklin and deism was effective in terms of shaping people in our age in terms of how we think about humanity and how we think about religion, is one of the things that's missing from Franklin's view is the fact that human beings are not wholly rational people. We are sinful people. So I'm going to go all the way back to Augustine and talk about that idea of whether you couch it as original sin or sinful nature or something. Like, I think when we look at social problems in the world, political problems in the world, economic problems in the world, a lot of it is because we think about human beings, we talk about them as if we are these rational beings, where in reality, that doesn't shape all of our decision making. So I think it's really important to have this view that we are broken people. Yeah. Now, that's going to lead to a need for grace. So that ultimately is like, I think grace is like the big thing.
Right.
But I think underlying that gets missed is pay attention to how often when you talk with someone and they'll talk about human beings, they never get around to that idea. And I think that's a huge one. So the fact that we are broken, sinful beings in need of grace, I think is what I would say is missing from that.
All right. Yeah, and I mean, mine sort of builds on that in that Franklin views God as creator, but then that's it. And so as you're studying deism, Franklin is a deist. One of the examples that gets used to help you understand it is the notion of God as a watchmaker, that God made the parts, set the watch in motion, but then has nothing to do with it after that it's a very hands-on, let humans do what they will. And then that removes the whole notion of God as being in relationship with us, as God as being someone who cares deeply about our daily life and goings on, as well as just involved or even maybe having a hand in shaping what happens in our daily lives. And so, as I read the question says who, when we think about the Christians we've encountered in this course, who would have a problem with Franklin? So, I mean, I think to me, when I think about that, I think Luther would have a huge problem with Franklin. I think, and I mean, for many reasons, but specifically the one that I am talking about here. I think that Augustine would have a significant problem with Franklin. I think Loyola would have a significant problem with Franklin. I think Teresa of Avila would have a problem with this point here that God set things into motion and then just sort of let's be what will be, because each of those people essentially are convicted by and then have this we can't, depending on how we want to interpret conversion moment, it's not necessarily a conversion, but it's like a life change moment. It's like for Augustine, it's like I was headed in one direction. God saved me, to kind of to your point, like God spoke to me when nothing else was. I'd pursued answers in all of these ways. For Teresa and Loyola, it's like my life was headed one way. God, and in some cases, almost like a crying out, and this is consistent with Luther too, like a crying out to God, and God being like, yes, and here's what I'm speaking to you, and here's how your life change will be directed and, move down a completely different path as a result of that. And we find that element, and that's what I actually love about this idea, is that, again, these historical examples work against the notion. Franklin would think that Hildegard of Bingen is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Franklin would think, again, that like Teresa of Avila is ridiculous. And so I love bringing out of the course these moments of sort of individual revelation that people have that, and if you think about it, aren't necessarily massive doctrinal changes, but are rather these moments to say, it actually proved to me at the end of the day that like God loved me. I was seen. I wasn't insignificant. And again, I love the equalizing, the sort of, everybody becomes equal in that type of model. If we go to the idea that, again, God is only involved at certain points, or to your point about being rational and the use of rationale and not recognizing that we're sinners, then again, it's like, well, then at what point in your life do you start to, quote, matter? Like, do children not matter? It's just, it raises for me a lot of questions.
So let me ask you this question. We're going to have you vote on this. Mm-hmm. So for mine, I am going to list it as human sinfulness. What do you want yours called? Because I'm really interested in this vote.
So the way we need to phrase it,
yes.
like, human.
So I'll have the question.
So, okay. Yeah. So if you're saying human sinfulness, then
that's the thing that's missing.
That's the thing that's missing.
Yep.
For me, what's missing is, like, I guess I would say, like, I don't know how we should say this, like, God's involved. It's not God as watchmaker.
Personal God?
Yeah, like personal God. Yeah, like God in the details.
Yeah, and we'll
like God in the details.
Okay, and we'll know because everybody's voting will have seen you say this, but I just want to know what we're going to name it.
I would say God in the details.
Nice. All right. So go on to Moodle, vote. We really do. I'm just actually deeply interested, especially in this last question.
I am emotionally and intellectually worn out from this rigorous segment of Make the
Do you think you can enjoy some happy time?
I think I could enjoy some happy time. So
right.
Let's take a quick break and come right back for some happy time.
All right, it is happy time. Amy, happy birthday to actress Kristen Chenoweth, who's 50 nifty years old today. I'm just reading the script.
Yeah, I can't believe that, actually. I was a little surprised to hear that.
I gotta say, she's somebody I know, but I also I don't really, when I hear the name, I don't have a picture in my head.
She's like huge in musical theater. Mm-hmm. Definitely has been like a Broadway powerhouse.
I've totally seen her in stuff,
years. And then, and also does now like a lot of voiceovers and animated films and things like that. So
Chris's question, though, is on an unrelated matter, because apropos of nothing, Amy, who should play each of us when they finally make CWC the feature film?
Oh,
you're totally on the spot there.
I am. That is really difficult.
This is how much I don't know what Kristen Chenoweth looks like. Is he saying that implying she would play you?
I don't think so. I don't know. She's this teeny tiny blonde powerhouse, and I don't know. So that would seem, I don't know, like an overreach to me. Okay.
But a lot of this casting is kind of an overreach.
Well, that's true.
This isn't like gritty 70s cinema.
People often tell me that I remind them of Leslie Knope, and I'm like, well, do you mean Amy Poehler? And they're like, no, Amy Poehler as Leslie Knope.
Huh.
So I would need the fictitious Leslie Knope to play me. Does that make sense? So it would need to be Amy Poehler playing Leslie Knope.
Playing you.
Playing me.
Wow, that's like some second level stuff.
I actually could see John Krasinski from The Office playing you. Part of it's because you love The Office, but I can see some shared traits and features there, so that, I don't know, that would totally make sense to me.
Chris Moore likes to think Stephen Merchant. It's British, but
I can see that. That's a good. I can totally see Stephen Merchant playing you. Or he's very versatile. Stephen Merchant could be Dr. Garrett.
That's true.
Too, so.
Or we could do some sort of Winklevoss thing where he's both.
Exactly, because I'm trying to think of who else would play Chris.
You can give him Krasinski, and then I'll take.
Yeah. I think either one of those we could have them just decide which role they would prefer. Probably.
Kind of like when Philip Seymour Hoffman and John C. Reilly would flip roles in True West. All right. Wow. There's a lot of theater comments.
Man, I know
today.
that was much easier than I thought it would be.
All right.
Happy anniversary Apollo 11, which returned to Earth this day in 1969 after Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first men to walk on the moon. I mean, I don't believe it. I don't think it actually happened. I think it was
Stanley Kubrick fake.
Yeah. Sam, if you were running NASA today, would you focus on returning to the moon, sending people to Mars, or continuing unstaffed exploration?
I think if I have to pick one of these, the closest to what I would say we should do is sending people to Mars, but it's not really sending people to Mars. What I think we need to do is, and I think because when I was a little kid, I had a science teacher who talked about this, but he was saying if we really wanted to do space exploration, what we need to do is have a robust space station that we can launch missions from, so you don't have to constantly be leaving the atmosphere. So I think that's job one, but that allows us to do things like go to Mars or go to Jupiter or to explore those monoliths.
Infrastructure first.
Yeah.
NASA, I hope you're listening.
But I am not.
Way to break down that to-do list.
I am not an anti space, because there are people who that's why it's like I think
children of the 80s, we are NASA fans.
And
we support
and
NASA.
I think that's where technological development comes from, is you have a big dream, you say we're going to go to Mars, and in doing that we're going to invent all of this other stuff. So I'm actually
we have a lot of readers that write into the show, so I just want to be clear, me saying I did not believe in the moon landing, that was just a joke. Totally believe in the moon landing. So
all right, happy trails to Martin Van Buren, the first American president born in an independent United States, died this day in 1862. Did you know Van Buren was the first president? I didn't know that. Okay. In your opinion, Amy, who's the most underrated American president?
Martin Van Buren? I don't really know. Taft? No, I mean, who's the most underrated president? I think people used to underrate John Adams, but then John Adams has had like a ton of play in the last couple of years, so he's no longer like the underrated president. The president, I feel bad, but okay. Again, readers, just hold off on these letters. But I actually do think Jimmy Carter is an underrated president. He gets such a bad rap for being like a bad president. But if I look at Jimmy Carter in terms of character, what I feel like he tried to do, integrity, like Jimmy Carter is totally, to me, an example of a Christian who tries to live in the world and not of it. And I teach Middle East, United States relations in one of my classes. And when we look at the Camp David Accords, and when we look at things like the Iranian Revolution, when we look at I have such appreciation for Jimmy Carter. And all I feel like I heard growing up was what an ineffective president Jimmy Carter was. And I kind of want to make the argument it's the system, not the man, because I feel like what made him ineffective was actually a reflection of how true his character is. So
and then
you're underrated, Jimmy Carter. I love you, and you know it.
Important post-presidential career as well.
Absolutely.
So,
and I mean, Habitat students, maybe you don't know, but I mean, Jimmy Carter's responsible for Habitat for Humanity. And again, I think that is such a model of a Christian engaging with the world. So, God, I'm going to be moved to tears here. Love you, Jimmy.
All right. Well, this is we've reached the end of yet another webisode. So make sure to hit the discussion boards. Tell us about your experiences with the science. Vote on Make the Case.
Yep.
Vote
on whether or not you say pecan or pecan. He was a pecan farmer. Jimmy was. What do you say? Pecan, pecan?
I think if I think about it, pecan.
Okay.
I think
people from Georgia say pecan.
I think if I was saying the pie, I might say pecan pie, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah. See, that's funny. That's what I was thinking too. And then I was like, toucan? Tuckin? I don't know.
There you go. All right. So vote on Make the Case. We could do
this all day.
Vote on Make the Case. Hit the discussion boards. Let us know what presidents you think were great.
Happy trails to me, because you will not see me again.
That's right.
Because Dr. Garrett's back by popular demand. The viewers
I don't know if we would say popular, but yes.
No, but he is gonna be back from his trip, and he is gonna sneak in here one last time, and so. Thanks, everybody. It's been great.
It's sort of like, the idea of Chekhov's gun, right? Like the gun appears in Act 1, it has to be fired in Act 3. If Chris Garrett appears in Webisode 1, he has to be fired in Webisode 7. Right, because
otherwise there's no way to wrap it up without him coming here. And maybe giving him an opportunity to air his grievances about all of the complaints we've made about his questions over the last 2 weeks.
We have to be a lot nicer.
We do. All right. Well, I won't be here. It's on you.
All right.
Bye.
We'll see you.